Communication Contractors Association has some surprising numbers. This report suggests that nationwide we need 28,000 more broadband construction workers and 30,000 more broadband technician workers. In Nebraska, the report identifies an estimated 1,000 of such construction and technician workers that are needed. Second, we're building a ton of new broadband networks in, generally speaking, some high-cost areas. These networks will be difficult to maintain, and the money being spent is on deployment of these networks, not on maintaining them. Director Robbins will give us an update on what the future could look like for maintaining networks in high-cost areas. But we as a committee need to be thinking about the best ways to maintain these networks to make sure that our citizens don't just get connected, but stay connected. Which brings me to affordability. Staying connected means more than just maintaining the networks. It means people are able to afford the network. Beginning in 2022, the Federal Affordability Connection Program, or ACP, provided discounts to individuals who were otherwise unable to afford high-speed internet. Nebraska had approximately 80,000 households enrolled in the program by the time federal funds were exhausted this May. While it is unclear how many of these households have lost their access due to the folding of the ACP, I do know that many of our Nebraska providers continue to offer low-cost, high-quality internet. While advocacy efforts are underway to reauthorize the ACP in some form at the federal level, without a more cohesive plan for ensuring affordable internet, I worry we will leave thousands of Nebraskans without access to the networks that we are building. We're blessed in Nebraska to have amazing and dedicated people working on broadband deployment. Whether they be our public servants guiding the grant programs, the workers laying out and installing our networks, the providers being willing to step up and provide service in traditionally difficult areas, or just your average citizen wanting to be sure that their neighbors can access the same opportunities. But we have to get this right. And I hope the testimony that follows will allow us to be more aware of the challenges that exist so that we can then address them in a proactive manner. Thank you for your time. And as always, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, are there questions for Senator DeBoer? Thank you very much. All right, our first testifier is Patrick Hagerty. They were able to reestablish communication between the hearing room and Nerve Central, and so the hearing is being live streamed again. They just had to reboot something. They had a power outage earlier this week. Something got confused, so please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chairperson Moser and committee. Thanks for having us. Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Hagerty, Patrick I'm here on behalf of the Nebraska Broadband Office. I'm here today to testify on efforts of the Nebraska Broadband Office concerning broadband expansion in Nebraska. The Nebraska Broadband Office is responsible for administrating the federally funded BEAD program. We saw the completion of a major programmatic milestone on September 18th with NTIA approving our initial proposal, Volume 2. Looking to the future, we're planning to begin the grant process with an anticipated date in late November. Our grant team is preparing the request for applications and associated materials so we can initiate sub-grantee selections. In addition, we have received our final location inventory based on our challenge process submitted on September 4th, where we processed 94,193 locations. From this information, we will create our defined project areas and know exactly where to specifically direct funding to connect all Nebraskans residing in unserved locations. While we have come a long way to approach deployment, we recognize there is still much to do and several constraints to address. Pole attachment agreements and permitting are more broadly is a particular concern. This involves navigating both local and federal permitting requirements. Nebraska is not alone in anticipating these issues, as all states are navigating this challenge. We are engaging with entities on all sides of the issue to proactively address the challenge. Another constraint is the labor market and how to address potential workforce shortages in a variety of sectors. Although Nebraska is fortunate to have a low unemployment rate, we continue to work closely with potential sub-grantees and other partners to support workforce initiatives. Finally, we continue to do outreach to internet service providers to encourage participation in the BEAD program when the grant process officially opens. As for the future needs of Nebraska, everything that is built to fiber through BEAD will be at minimum 100 down, megabits down, 20 megabits up, and scalable to symmetrical gigabit speeds. Our office is committed to funding projects that will see fiber built wherever it is physically and fiscally practical to do so. As stated by officials at NTIA, fiber networks are the most future-proof of the available broadband infrastructure technologies. Prioritizing these projects ensures we will not have to reinvest build-out dollars in these networks for the foreseeable future. Thank you for your time and your continued interest and support in connecting Nebraskans to high-speed, reliable broadband. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Are there questions? Senator Boston?
Thank you. On the grants that come out, that you will see come out with BEAD, I read one place where there's questions how the states are going to run those programs, whether it's a reimbursement or whether it's a how are you planning on doing that here in the state?
Senator, committee members, it's a great question. We are going to reimburse quarterly. So sub-grantee, awarded sub-grantee would submit invoices on a quarterly basis to be reimbursed in that quarter.
So do you think that'll keep some providers from applying because they won't have the capital to be able to do that?
Senator, committee members, we work really closely with our provider community. For most, that's acceptable, and we have language that allows some flexibility on that if, from a capital perspective, there needs to be more frequent reimbursements. So, yeah, all the feedback I've gotten from our potential sub-grantees is that that's workable.
So it can be during milestones, reimbursements during milestones, or no, just complete project?
Yeah.
And then do they have to verify that they have completed, like we have in others, they are providing 120? Okay,
Senator, committee members, yeah, there'll be an entire closeout of a project, which will include testing, speed testing, and verifiability as to the locations they accepted when bidding on the project.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Senator DeKay.
Thank you. I got two quick questions. Number one, there's a large section on the map that's not being, it's still in the yellow. Is there other options besides fiber or what are the options out there to make sure that those?
Yeah, Senator, committee members, it's a great question. I may kind of step back a bit to give the full context and just the amount of work that went into the challenge process. Here in Nebraska, we processed over 7,000 challenges addressing 94,000 locations. What you all have in terms of the map reflects our post-challenge process. So these are our inventory. These are the approved fundable locations through NTIA. And more directly to your question, Senator, yes, the way Congress designed the program is, I think of it as somewhat of a pyramid. So it's a fiber first concept. We've got with each of the project areas, and that'll be the next step in terms of the map is defining our project areas. We think there's going to be roughly 80 to 100 project areas in Nebraska. You first have to exhaust any application that proposes a fiber solution to it. So the way it's in simplest terms, say we have round one, and round one is specific to fiber, which it has to be by law. And of those 80 project areas, 60 of them don't get bid on because for whatever reason, most likely financial. We can then move to a second tier of technologies, which include coaxial infrastructure, copper infrastructure, DSL, or licensed fixed wireless. If we get, again, those 20 projects, we get 10 of them bid on by that tier of alternate technologies. We can then move down to the third tier, which is unlicensed fixed wireless and low orbit satellite. And so maybe a long way around to your question, but yeah, as we get to these, we see on the map some very hard locations to get to from a fiscal perspective with fiber. We can fall back on some alternate technologies.
And then one more quick follow-up question. West River on the Missouri River up in north central Nebraska, you look at the perimeter of the map going around, taking the Missouri River out out of this scenario, are there any interstate agreements between, say, Nebraska, South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, and Kansas?
Not in this regard, Senator Committee members, not in this regard. Some of the better examples of what we're going to have to navigate is maybe in that southeastern corner on the Kansas border. There's going to be providers that I think straddles both states. And so we'll have to understand how either we reimburse each other as a state for the locations on their side, or there's a MDU that says, Nebraska, you got those, we'll give you the money for them kind of thing. But something that we're going to have to do. I don't think there'll be a lot of it, as you can see on the map, but there'll be some.
All right, thank you.
So in general, would you say that things are going better than what you expected or worse? Or because it wasn't so long ago where the problem was much larger than what we had plans to address.
That is very accurate. And to give you a sense of that, the numbers I have on my whiteboard in the office, when I was appointed to July 17th of last year, we had approximately 111,000 unserved and underserved locations in the state. We thought the money that was being funded to Nebraska would cover about half of those and just get us just beneath the unserved mandate of meeting the unserved mandate. Through other federal programs and state programs, I'm sure Cole will talk about, we are down to roughly 32,000 locations in the state. And we believe BEAD will fund all unserved and underserved locations at this time. So our situation, our position in Nebraska has improved dramatically, Senator. In terms of the program itself, I and the staff, I can tell you, don't feel like we've caught our breath since last July. But along the way, there's been some hiccups in working with NTIA, and I think to their defense, they were trying to stand up a $42.5 billion program. So, but I think we've gotten through most of those things. I'm anxious to get into our application round, our pre-qualification round, to really, it's been difficult to gauge the interest of our local providers in this program. So in our pre-qualification process, we will ask for, without any enforceable commitment, project areas that they're interested in. So that'll give us, we hope, somewhat of a feel just how steep that hill is to get folks engaged. But no, I think we're right where we need to be. I would share, I think we're right where we are. We've been working the last week on severely abbreviating the timeline we originally had, and I think we can pull it off. It's just going to be a lot of hard work to get there, but the timeline we're working from right now has dirt being broke next April.
By next April?
Yep. So there's no room for error in that timeline, but it's what we've taken on.
That's pretty ambitious, or is that doable?
I think it's really ambitious, and the concern I have with it is that NTIA is our partner in this, and they're very much involved in what we do as a state, and that's not unlike all other states, 56 states and territories. But when things have to go back through them and get out of our control in terms of the timing of them returning it as approved or not approved, that's concerning. I think that, if anything, is probably the biggest concern I have in the timeline is we've built in an amount of time that's reasonable for NTIA to review and return something to us. It's whether or not they can do that is somewhat out of our hands and a concern.
Okay, thank you. Good. No other questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Chair, committee members.
All right, our next testifier is Cullen Robbins from the Public Service Commission.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Cullen Robbins, spelled Cullenrobbins. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation from Senator DeBoer to appear today. I'm the director of the Telecom and NUSF department with the Nebraska Public Service Commission. I'd like to briefly update you on the broadband deployment projects that the commission administers. We really have three main programs that provide 100 megabit per second symmetrical broadband to unserved and underserved areas of the state. That would be the Nebraska Universal Service Fund, the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Program, and the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Capital Projects Fund. In an effort to avoid reading a bunch of numbers to you, I've provided a handout that summarizes locations that have been built to or will be built to through these programs. I just want to provide a high-level overview of each of these. And I'll start with the bridge program. That, again, is the $20 million per year general fund supported program that brings service to underserved and underserved locations. Statute requires matching funds of at least 25%. In some cases, 50% is required. And for build-outs to be completed within 18 months, although extensions can be requested. We are in the middle of our fourth round of the grant program. Projects from the 2021 cycle are complete. Projects from the 2022 grant cycle are almost all complete, with the exception of, I think, one project that was granted an extension until November. Projects approved in the 2023 grant cycle are in progress, with their deadline for completion in July of 2025. And the fourth grant cycle, the 2024 grant cycle, is now underway, and we are on schedule to make awards in January. The handout includes some information on the applications that were received in that grant cycle. The Capital Projects Fund program is a result of support that was allocated to the state from American Rescue Plan funds. A total of $128 million was allocated to the state, and of that amount, at least $87.7 million was designated for broadband deployment, with at least $40 million to be awarded in each of the congressional districts 1 and 3. You might recall that there was initially a statutory restriction in place on whether grants could be awarded in CD3. That restricted grants only for in-town builds, which narrowed the eligible areas for deployment. So our first grant cycle didn't award the full amount available in CD3. Overall, we awarded about $61 million of the $87.7 million available. That restriction was removed with the passage of LB 683 in the 2023 legislative session. And then we undertook another grant cycle to utilize the remaining available funds. Projects from the first round of the CPF funding are underway, with many complete or nearing completion. The initial deadline for those projects to be completed is December 27th, 2024. There is a possibility that there might be some extensions requested and potentially granted. Awards in the second round were made this past June, and the 18-month deadline for those projects to be completed is December 4th, 2025. All the funds for CPF must be dispersed by the end of 2026. I'll mention also briefly that the commission has continued to approve boundary changes. That's another way that citizens in the state can potentially get service from a provider that is close to them. We've done several of those just in the last couple of weeks, and many of those in the past year. We do provide a summary of those in our annual report to the legislature. So if you're curious, there is a summary of those available. Next, I'll move to the NUSF. The handout shows what NUSF has done the last few years in terms of build out of broadband capable networks through the high cost program. The ability to redirect funds through our reverse auction has been particularly helpful in getting service to areas that desperately need it. We've completed 3 reverse auctions over the last couple of years, and while the first one ended up being more of a test run and kind of a learning experience, the last 2 have been very successful, resulting in nearly $21 million in awards from that second auction and over $17 million in awards from the third. These projects bring broadband to unserved locations in high-cost areas of the state. I also want to cover a docket that we have open, which will make significant changes to the NUSF. This docket was initiated in anticipation of completion of broadband projects in the programs that we administer, but also that we expect to see quite a bit of broadband deployed through the BEAD program. We've worked to transition the NUSF away from supporting new capital construction, more towards supporting broadband networks that are already in place. The NUSF distribution for the 2025 calendar year moves away from build out and will provide support for maintaining and covering ongoing expenses for networks that are broadband capable. We are also looking at ways that support might be provided to carriers that are not the traditional local carrier to receive support if they bring broadband to locations that do not have another competitive provider there. By statute, NUSF should be used for the provision, maintenance, and upgrading of facilities, and we believe our approach is doing that. Besides the day-to-day costs of provisioning and maintaining services, many of the networks that are supported through the NUSF are aging, with some fiber to the premise networks well over a decade old at this point. While the fiber itself can often last decades, many of the electronics and other equipment that are integral parts of the network have shorter useful lives, and we expect that the NUSF will continue to be vital to keep those networks operating. Transitioning NUSF to primarily support existing networks is likely to have another benefit that I think is worth covering. Historically, a significant portion of the NUSF has been used for build-out funds, and as the chart in the handout shows, it has successfully funded projects in unserved high-cost areas. It has for years been the practice of the commission to safeguard the use of public funds by requiring proof from carriers that build-out has occurred in order to receive reimbursement from the NUSF. The downside of that approach is that there's been a build-out in the balance in NUSF since the projects are typically multi-year endeavors. With the move away from capital construction or build-out, I expect the NUSF balance to decrease as current projects reach completion. And moving forward, the fund balance is expected to decrease significantly and remain at a lower level. Like everyone, we're eager to see the build-out efforts underway through the BEAD program. We remain in close communication with the Broadband Office as we make awards in the programs we administer. We routinely share information with Mr. Hagerty and his team and their vendors, and ensuring that we have open lines of communication with them as questions come up and issues arise. And we look forward to continuing that collaborative relationship moving forward. Finally, I understand the committee also wanted to hear about potential issues that could delay deployment, and I can share some insights based on some of the extension requests and feedback that we've received through our programs. One key factor worth mentioning is that for many of our programs, 18 months is the required build-out time. Depending on when that funding is initially awarded, 18 months might not cover 2 full construction seasons. And that tends to be what we see is necessary to complete those builds. With that in mind, things like weather issues like snow and excessive rain can cause some delays in those construction projects. Carriers have also cited some challenges in getting approval for rights-of-way access, and those challenges can arise from a number of different entities: cities, counties, railroads, sanitary improvement districts, homeowners associations, Army Corps of Engineers. Those are just a few that have been cited in information that's been submitted to us. We've also received some requests for extensions citing labor shortages and difficulties finding third parties to perform some of the work. I think that was mentioned by Senator DeBoer in the opener. And then in our early rounds of bridge, we also were aware of some issues with supply chain issues causing delays. That seems to have eased recently, although those can be a little bit unpredictable when those types of issues pop up. So with that, I appreciate your time and the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions from the panel? I just had one question on your chart. There were the capital project funds. There weren't any from the second district, or is that a typo?
That is not a typo. When the legislation was passed directing the funds for capital projects, in District 2, it was put towards, I can't remember the exact term, multi-use community buildings or something like that instead of broadband.
So it was used somewhere else?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Other comments, questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Committee.
Appreciate you coming in on a Friday afternoon.
Happy to do it. Thanks.
Okay, that brings us to our next testifier, Ron Cohn from ESU number 10. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senators. My name is Ron Cohn, R-O-N-C-O-N-E. I'm the Director of Network Information Services at ESU 10 in Kearney. I've been in that role for 18 years. Prior to that, I was a network engineer for 9 years. I'm also a member of the ESU CC Network Operations Committee, a co-chair of the Network Nebraska Advisory Group, and a member of the Rural Broadband Task Force. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Senator Boer's staff reached out to me and shared a 2019 report showing 22 schools were without fiber access. And the report that's being handed out to you, I have updated with collaboration with my ESU colleagues that now shows that 11 of these sites now have fiber, 6 of them have closed, and 5 of them are using alternative connectivity, primarily wireless for their connectivity. Now recognize these are school buildings, not necessarily the district itself. The needs of districts in Nebraska have been provided by fiber for numerous years, decades in fact. Some of these have gone back to the mid-90s where distance learning networks were still originally being put in. Some of them may have started with copper and then switched over to fiber to meet the demands of the distance learning networks. But our providers in the state of Nebraska have been great to work with to provide that type of connectivity to schools. And so the things that you see on the report here are really an indication that our providers are increasing the networks. They're expanding with some of the programs you previously heard about and are generally meeting the needs of education for their telecommunications and internet access they use. So if access is not the issue, typically what becomes is affordability. And what you may find here on these 5 schools, I don't know all the details of them, but it could be affordability that is possibly the issue. What you don't find on this report also is any of the private parochial schools. This is all just public schools currently. But what I find in the ESU 10 area is that the larger elementaries and high schools have fiber access in them. It would be the smaller schools that may use an alternative connection, whether it be copper or an alternative. And I would expect that would be the case across the state as well. There are several efforts within the state to address some of these issues. Certainly the access, you've heard about that, and that is increasing with these programs. Affordability is being addressed in many of the districts in a couple ways. One is leveraging the E-rate program from the federal system, and schools use that to subsidize their telecommunications and their network infrastructure. At ESU 10, we tailor our services to leverage that as best we can and help schools get the best money that they can from that program. There's also collaborative efforts like Network Nebraska that helps to lower the unit cost of commodity internet for its members and develops larger competitive bidding opportunities that can help drive prices down. So in summary, the broadband and things related to broadband education and connectivity to support teaching and learning are doing well in Nebraska. So I'm happy to report that. Our focus is now shifting more towards cybersecurity needs and to address the increasing threats to our networks and our users. So we'll continue to partner together as we have for many years to find solutions to those needs, but I encourage this committee, the legislature, to consider those as high priorities in the next session as well. With that, I'd be glad to take any questions you have.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the committee? Senator.
Thank you, Chair Mauser. Thank you for taking the time to speak. I'm just kind of curious. So some of the schools that may still have challenges or issues, has satellite internet been considered at all as an option for those areas?
These specific areas, I don't know exactly their specific challenges. I can see the one Cutcomb Lake there in Valentine Community Schools, 58 miles from Valentine. I imagine that there may be fiber in the area. I don't know for sure. When Starlink came on the market, it was a big deal. And I know, at least for consumers, I am not certain, but I have heard of some schools using it for certain areas. Not certain about this specific one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator DK.
Thank you. Going like, say with Bennington Public Schools, just using Bennington as an example, was the community of Bennington already being served and then the schools caught up later, or did Bennington and the school system all come receive fiber or receive internet at the same, high-speed internet at the same time?
Well, I wish I could answer your question more specifically. I'm not familiar with Bennington and how it's done. I imagine that the district had access But I'm not sure how this specific
I was
project
just
would.
curious across the state if when communities say at Valentine, if they were all got brought into the circle at the same time, or if they were, the community was served first and then the schools.
Usually, as I said, the schools have been served with fiber. The district, some building in the district been served with fiber for decades. And so it could be that an alternative provider came into the area and was willing to extend a network. It could have been E-rate funds that built a network out between the buildings. In Bennington, I'm not sure how that specific was done.
Well, I was just using them as
Yeah.
an example, but yeah.
In the areas that I'm a little more familiar with, that is usually the case is E-rate category 1 brings, the program can bring fiber to the building, and then they may use other types of programs to distribute that out to the buildings amongst themselves. I've seen that numerous times at Grand Island, at Kearney, Lexington.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Bosman.
Thank you. You may or may not know the answer to this question, but I'll ask, because I think we tried to work on it a little bit, or it came up in the rural broadband task force when we were talking about it. Recently, just this week, my neighbor we were actually out looking at the Comet, and during the discussions, their kids who go to East Butler, they don't have fiber, they don't have internet at their house, but the school requires them to be able to get their homework, do work online, right? My question comes down to, are there any schools that you know of, is there a program or something out there encouraging where, I think we talked about where the school could provide a wireless type of connection for students, so you could be outside of the school to connect, so you can get that connection. You know, there's firewalls put up, what access they actually have to it, but that they could connect from outside of the school facility, the building itself, so that when mom and dad they're out in the field harvesting, they can't, but if they could somehow wirelessly connect.
Yeah, and are you speaking at the campus of the school itself?
Right.
Physically?
So if they could at least get to town,
Yeah.
if they could be near the school. Years ago, we could be near the co-op, and that would work. But that doesn't work anymore, is what they tell me. But, you know, being near the school now, because that was one thing I think we talked about, but I don't know whatever happened with that.
Yeah, each school, addresses it a little bit differently, but a number of schools that we've worked with have extended their connectivity out into their sports areas, whether it's football field or another area, practice field. Some of that is to broadcast their events, and then those same devices can provide that to cover their parking lots, things like that. It's kind of up to them as to how they do it, but I know there are several that have that.
Capability is there if they want. So.
Capability is definitely there.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Senator Bosman, have you gotten fiber to your house yet?
I have a picture to show you. Yes, we actually have fiber to my house. It's not lit yet, but yes, we have fiber. It only took 8 years, but hey, we're getting there.
Yes. I thought you seemed calmer.
Just a little bit.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Now we'll open up comments to other testifiers. If you'd like to testify, please come forward. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Mosier, members of the Transportation Telecommunications Committee. My name is Tip O'Neill. That's spelled TITO''Neill. And I'm the president of the Nebraska Telecommunications Association. The NTA represents 21 companies providing broadband and landline telecommunications services in Nebraska. I'm providing a handout that Brian is handing out right now that shows areas where NTA members are utilizing state and federal programs to build and enhance broadband networks in rural Nebraska. Kind of indicate geographically where those are located. This committee has recognized the importance of providing state resources to deploy high-speed broadband in rural areas in Nebraska. We appreciate the work and leadership of the committee that led to the passage of LB 388 in 2021 to create the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Act and to reduce the company match in LB 1144 for high-cost areas passed in 2022. That program continues to receive $20 million per year in general funds to enhance deployment in unserved and underserved areas. LB 1024, which was enacted in 2022, allocated almost $90 million in ARPA capital projects, federal funds for broadband expansion in congressional districts 1 and 3. With $405 million in BEAD funding for projects expected to begin next year, and from federal universal service and funding from the enhanced ACAM program, Nebraska will make high-speed internet a reality for almost all of our rural residents by the end of 2028. It will truly make a difference in our ability to attract and retain millennials to rural areas where they desire to live and raise families. It will lead to greater economic growth, higher household incomes, and attract entrepreneurs and small business owners to those areas. It will support more efficient and profitable agricultural practices. I will continue to remind you of the importance of the Nebraska and federal universal service programs to operate and maintain those new broadband networks. It is our ability that USF programs are integral to the operation and maintenance of broadband in unserved and underserved areas of rural Nebraska. With significant money to be invested in broadband deployment in Nebraska in the next few years, even more money will be needed to maintain those rural networks. We cannot build networks and then ignore them. As the handout indicates, NTA members are deploying high-speed internet from border to border. From Fort Robinson to Rock Creek Station, from the Bluffs to the Missouri River to the Western Panhandle, NTA companies are making a difference in the lives of rural residents. And in fact, it is an NTA company that is providing broadband to Senator Bosselman. Thanks again for your committee's commitment in making broadband service comparable in rural areas of the state to our urban areas. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Senator Bosselman.
I would be remiss if I didn't have a question or two, at least for Tim, this road deal. It's always been a pleasure having you testify at our hearings and the discussions we've had over the last 8 years. I asked Mr. Hagerty the question on the BEAD funding, and I have a little bit of a concern on that, and I don't know if there's something that we can change statewide. Your members, do you think the reimbursement after the project is going to hinder any deployment by your members because they're just not financially going to be able to do that, rather than having a milestone reimbursement type thing put in place?
Well, it's nothing that Mr. Hagerty and his office can do anything about. I mean, it's the federal law, I think, as far as reimbursement, isn't that right? Yeah. And so it may, in certain instances, I think when you're talking, it kind of depends on where the designated project areas are and how close they are to some of our smaller local companies' exchanges. That's probably going to make have a determination into whether those companies participate in the BEAD program. We certainly, from the NTA standpoint, have been encouraging our companies to participate because, again, those companies have long Nebraska roots and have spent many generations in providing it's beginning with telephone services in Nebraska and now providing broadband. And we want that sort of community involvement to continue and in building out new networks. As you can see, our companies have been active in utilizing the current programs to build and bring internet to more sparse areas in Nebraska, and we hope to continue that.
Well, I agree, and I just hope that we don't, if there's an unintentional consequence of that type of a process, and I'll check with our NCIA rep with that as well, is there an option if we need it? Because, you're right, our state providers do a great job, and we've had problems with our large national providers not doing that. In fact, the Windstream, and I'll say it right now, that when they laid fiber to my neighbor, the fiber company cut the copper line, and they're like, well, we'll get to it someday, maybe, for them to come in and repair it. And this is for a 92-year-old couple. That's just not acceptable. You know, we'll get there someday, and that's just, you know, on a copper line to replace that got severed. But I do, my concern is that we don't, you know, that there's an impediment set in there for some of our companies because they just can't afford, you know, that reimbursement process. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Sure. Okay, other questions? Senator Bosman.
Thank you. Tip, tell me about bridge funding. Is there going to be bridge funding that's needed going forward, given that some communities in some areas are not eligible for the BEAD project money that we're distributing?
Well, you know, if ultimately, you know, BEAD is supposed to serve all unserved locations, and again, it will serve most, if not all, underserved locations. The question is whether there are going to be holes in that coverage that includes some people shouldn't, but I still say that until the BEAD BEAD is completely implemented, which will probably be 2028, there's still a role for the broadband bridge program, in my opinion, because you can fill in holes with that, and that's what a lot of our companies are doing right now.
Well, I guess, is there some areas that didn't qualify for BEAD because they were receiving funding through a rural digital opportunity fund or something along those lines? And we were using bridge money to help with those
Right,
projects?
in those RDOF areas where the companies defaulted, yeah. So there might be opportunities. I don't know exactly how that coexists with BEAD.
Okay.
So I'll check and see, but certainly if there's a default in a federal program that was counted on by BEAD to be served by a certain date, then it would still be, I think, appropriate and practical to be able to use some state funds from the broadband bridge program and fill in that area. Because this is a kind of a once in a generation, once in a lifetime opportunity to use federal funds to provide these services. And if you don't get it now, you're probably never going to get it.
Senator DeKay.
This question probably should have been directed to Director Hagerty, but I'll ask if somebody might be able to respond to it. When it comes to federal funding with what you would call strings attached, is there anything in place that this has to be fiber, or can it be satellite, Starlink, or certain projects have to be put into place using specific?
Yeah, I think Patrick answered that to a certain extent in his answer, that you kind of determine what the cost per location is going to be in determining what sort of technology the area might be able for. If you're talking about a cost somewhere between, I think, 10 and 15,000 per location, then you probably use fiber. If it's higher than that, then you go to the next technology, which is fixed wireless, basically coaxial cable and a couple others. And then if nobody wants to provide that sort of service, then you go to the satellite. So satellite's kind of the third tier of providing service through BEAD.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Mosier and members of the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee. My name is Andy Pollock. That's A-N-D-Y. Pollock is P-O-L-L-O-C-K. I'm appearing here on behalf of the Nebraska Rural Broadband Alliance as a registered lobbyist. I'll call them the NRBA for purposes of this discussion. The NRBA consists of 13 Nebraska rural broadband providers serving customers across the state. all NRBA providers offer broadband services that exceed state and federal speed and reliability standards. I'd like to thank Senator DeBoer and Senator Bossum for introducing this resolution and for raising the specific important issues that they've asked us to address. You've asked us to address broadband deployment projects that have been undertaken in the past, as well as the future maintenance and upkeep of the network, and I will focus on those two issues in my testimony. Of the NRBA members, 7 are traditional ILECs, and an ILEC is a provider with a historic duty to serve a designated service area called an exchange. Since the late 1990s, every one of the ILEC members of the NRBA has received federal and state universal service support. That is true of all ILECs in Nebraska, all incumbent local exchange carriers in Nebraska. Along with that support came obligations to serve, to deploy infrastructure and provide voice and what we now call broadband services to all customers within the ILECs exchanges. This is called the carrier of last resort duty. That's the COLR obligation. Taking this COLR obligation seriously, each NRBA member ILEC completed fiber deployment throughout its incumbent territory. Stable and predictable NUSF support was critical to our members completing that deployment over time. Some completed fiber deployment throughout their exchanges before 2010. Others were finished well before 2020. And remember, this started in the late 1990s with the legislature's passage of the Nebraska Universal Service Fund Act in 1997. Nebraska NRBA members accomplished complete deployment with USF funds, which they leveraged with other sources of funding. They used other sources of funding as well, including, but not limited to, personal funds by family-owned businesses, USDA loans through the Rural Utility Service, and they relied on USF support to service the debt on those loans, which are still outstanding and will be outstanding through the next decade. They also used funds that members of telephone cooperatives, mainly farmers and ranchers, put at risk. We have 3 cooperative members of the NRBA. Again, they got it done. They built fiber throughout their territories by at least 2020. In recent years, NRBA members have used federal and state grant funding to deploy fiber infrastructure, not in their own territories, you heard about that, which were already built out, but rather in areas where other carriers had and still have a COLR obligation. Under programs such as the Bridge and the Capital Projects Fund, which you've heard of earlier today, the legislature and the Public Service Commission have wisely encouraged competition in areas where broadband service was lacking. NRBA members have used those funds as well as CARES Act funds through DED to connect over 7,400 Nebraskans in the past few years. Those are 7,400 Nebraskans in rural areas that didn't have adequate service before. All broadband providers who take rural service seriously understand that the opportunity Nebraska faces with the BEAD program funding, which will be available, as you heard, next year. While we should all be excited by the opportunity of that the BEAD fund presents, for future-proofing our network, we must be mindful of the reality of the ongoing cost of operating these broadband networks that we're building. The cost far exceeds what customers could be able to afford to pay. This goes to Senator DeBoer's point that she made earlier. The Nebraska Universal Service Fund will be more important than it ever has been. In order to cover the cost of operating and maintaining the network in rural areas, USF support will be critical. The Public Service Commission is to be commended for its reform work on USF, which Mr. Robbins talked about earlier. The average cost of serving customers in some of our territories exceeds $233 a month. You got your written testimony in front of you. I defer to that. You want me to just go ahead and finish? Okay, I'll wrap up then. Thank you, Senator. Few customers could afford that actual cost of $233 a month. It's safe to say some of our fiber loops, that's the fiber line between the central office in town and the customer location, are 40 miles long, reaching ranches that are 40 miles out of town. The cost of serving those customers is even higher than the average. And I bring all this up just to demonstrate the importance of the Universal Service Fund to operating and maintaining a broadband network that will be resilient over time, provide access to quality services over time. The fund is critical to ensuring Nebraskans have reliable access to broadband and other essential services like 911. And that concludes my testimony. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Well, looks like there aren't any other questions, but thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anybody else that was planning to testify? Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mosier, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Andrew Vinton. That's spelled ANDREWVINTON. I'm the in-house legal counsel and registered lobbyist for Alo Communications. Here just to provide some commentary on the questions posed in LR 402. First, some background on Alo. Alo was founded by Brad Moline in Imperial, Nebraska in 2003, and today is the largest telecommunications provider that is headquartered and managed in the state of Nebraska. For over 21 years, Alo has been building ubiquitous community-wide fiber-to-the-premise networks and has invested more than $600 million of private capital to bring broadband to Nebraskans. Once Alo's in-progress builds are completed, more than 60% of Nebraskans who live outside the city of Omaha will have access to Alo's symmetrical gigabit or multi-gig service. Alo employs about 1,000 full-time associates and serves more than 30 communities in Nebraska. Alo is also one of the largest taxpayers in a number of Nebraska counties, including Lancaster County. As a competitive fiber provider, Alo is not eligible to receive high-cost support from the state or federal Universal Service Fund or to participate in certain FCC programs such as ACAM. As a result, the vast majority of Alo's fiber investments have been funded through private capital and are targeted at areas where there is a business case to serve. However, Alo has successfully utilized the Nebraska PSC's Broadband Bridge and Capital Projects Fund grant programs to extend service to homes and businesses to sparse areas that we cannot make a business case to serve. Alo has received a total of 19 grants from Bridge and CPF, all of which have been utilized to extend multi-gig fiber to the premise service to unserved and underserved customers in predominantly rural areas. We thank the PSC for their work in administering these valuable programs. Alo looks forward to evaluating opportunities to further expand our fiber footprint to more unserved and underserved areas through the $405 million made available through the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, the BEAD program, which is being administered by the Nebraska Broadband Office. Alo wants to thank Director Hagerty and the NBO staff for their tireless efforts in establishing and refining this generational opportunity. The BEAD program is intended to serve all unserved and underserved locations in Nebraska. Repair, maintenance, and upgrades to these networks will become one of the most important policy discussions post-BEAD. Alo looks forward to working with policymakers to develop strategies to ensure these next-generation networks are adequately supported over the long term. Lastly, Alo thanks the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee, as well as all members of the legislature, for their thoughtful consideration and leadership on matters of telecommunications and broadband policy. We value the partnership and cooperation between the private and public sector as we work to serve the needs of Nebraska citizens and bridge the digital divide. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Senator Bosman.
Thank you. On the second paragraph, up the fourth line from the bottom, whichever you said, more than 60% of Nebraskans who live outside the city of Omaha. Could you define that a little bit better?
Sure. So within the city limits of Omaha, if you exclude that 450,000, Alo serves over 60% of the individuals that are not in Omaha. We do not provide service in the city of Omaha proper to a meaningful extent, but we do have more than 30 communities where we have built ubiquitous fiber networks.
So it's really not rural, it's still city.
Most of our networks are in the city. Yes, we are a competitive provider, so we have to make the business case to serve these areas. But through various efforts, including Bridge and CPF, we have started to build into those more truly rural, high-cost areas. The rub is we don't receive any type of ongoing Universal Service Fund support, so we have to make sure that either those networks are self-sustaining or we're able to.
Sure, I understand that completely. I just, when you say 60% outside of the city of Omaha, it's kind of maybe a little bit better. I just want to make sure everyone understood what we're talking about. We're not talking about too far out. Really, Elk river. We're not talking about anybody outside of the metropolitan area, I guess I'd call it.
Yep.
So you're not doing the rural area in Saunders County. You're not doing the rural area in Colfax County. When you say 60% of Nebraska live outside of the city of Omaha, to me, that means the rest of the state, not just near Omaha. Am I reading that wrong?
No, I
So
think you're,
I just want to make sure, for the record, Alo isn't reaching 60% of the state.
we're reaching 60% of the state's citizens and households outside the city of Omaha. Our furthest west market is Scottsbluff. Our furthest east is
So you are,
Grand Papillion and La Vista.
so it is 60% of people in town outside the city of Omaha.
Correct, of the total population.
Okay, and just so we understand, that does create problems for us sometimes when we're trying to build out areas, because when you build a city, you have to, or a town, or a village, or a community, once you build that, that takes the incentive away of building outside of that to the farms and ranches in that local area, because now you've taken that funding away from that. So I encourage Alo to begin to build outside of those towns, cities, villages, because it makes it very hard, I think, for all of our other providers to be able to serve those areas, because you've just taken what they need to make a profit, make it a business model for them to serve those outside there. So I encourage Alo to start building outside of those communities.
We're very optimistic that the BEAD program and other upcoming programs will give us the opportunity to do that, Senator.
Yeah, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anybody else to testify? Senator DeBoer.
Good afternoon again. Thank you to all the testifiers today. I thought that was a lot of really helpful information to have out there. It seems like by next interim, we should have a really good sense of whether or not we're going to make our 2028 goal. So we'll have a good sense by, I think, next interim. It seems like we're progressing apace right now, and we'll know more next year. In this next biennium, we're going to have to probably shift the thinking of this committee from build out to maintenance and affordability. As Senator Bosin pointed out, we're probably going to have to start in this next biennium asking questions about the future of the Bridge Act, what that will look like. When I started on this committee 6 years ago, I never would have thought that I would be sitting here 6 years later at a time when we would see that Senator Bosselman had service. So, couldn't have imagined it, but we did get there. But seriously, I never thought that we would get this far this fast. When you think back to where we were 6 years ago on this committee, and it was maybe just Senator Bosselman and I that were on this committee 6 years ago, but when we were sitting there 6 years ago, looking at the task ahead of us, we never thought we would be able to get the money together. So the fact that we had that help from our federal partners who made it possible is really fantastic, because obviously everyone has seen the importance of broadband to our state. But I do think that we as a committee are going to have to start thinking about how do we now shift? Because we were just on, how do we make it possible to get broadband out there? We're going to have to shift our thinking now from that into how do we maintain these systems? How do we keep this up? How do we look at affordability for the people of Nebraska? So these questions that we've been asking for the last quite a few years, I think we're going to if we're going to be forward looking, which I think we need to be, we're going to have to start shifting our thinking as a committee. So that's at least what I picked up from this hearing as well, is that that's the task before us now, is to make sure we continue to get to where we say we're going to get to, where we want to get to, where the broadband office is getting us to by 28, and that we think about how we then shift to the next question, which is how do we, once we get it, how do we keep it? So, what a time to be alive, right? Boston has service and.
Not yet, close.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. We're getting there. So thank you for your time and attention to this. And I look forward to continuing to talk about these things next year. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Senator Bosman.
Uh-oh.
Yes. Thank you for bringing the LR and to take a look at this. So I guess this is the handoff of the mantle to you both perhaps on this. And I was nice during this session, so this LR a little bit more, but yes, it's something we need to pay close attention to and work with all of our providers, obviously, and make sure this happens because it's a huge issue out there, a lot of work that needs to be done. I'm very skeptical that we'll get there, but you really got to stay on top of it. And you got to work with them and you got to make sure you're watching that and you ask the hard questions and you continue to be on that, continue to make sure they do work to reach all Nebraskans because it's critical. It's not a nice to have anymore. It's a necessity in life and death in some cases. So thank you for bringing it and stay on top of it. Thanks.
Will do.
Any other questions? Thank you, Senator DeBoer. We appreciate it. With that, it concludes our hearing for today.